Okay, so real quick, we'll just continue from parameter from our previous class, which is parameters in fast API. And in the previous class, we looked at two major ways of exchanging of sending in information or data to our endpoint, which is the basic ways, which is a path parameter and query parameter. And we also said that path parameter is simply a kind of parameter that makes up a complete URL. So it means that once we establish a path parameter, and once we establish a path parameter, we have to actually provide it. So it's not optional. But then with query parameters, it's a kind of parameter on the other hand that comes after the question mark sign in a URL. So these two ways are basically means of sending in information to our server via the URL, right? Via the URL. That's basically what those two ways are actually being used for. Okay, so let's just open up our VS Code and let's see where we stopped. All right, so real quick, by now we are already familiar with this process, right? That we have to do what we have to activate our virtual environment. Now we have two reasons for doing that. One is that so that we can use all those dependencies that we have installed there, and the other part is that so that just in case we want to install anything going forward in this particular project, we don't have to install it globally, right? So something that we are already familiar with. So go ahead and just say library box script and then activate. And then I'll just cd into our main folder and open up this folder in VS Code. All right. So where that is coming up, what is coming up? Any question pertaining to our previous class before we add on top of that of what we learned previously? Question on previous class before we. I think in our previous class we had a lot of network issues. So I want to be sure that we somehow got the point before we before we just add to what we learned in our previous class. All right. So Will, your hand is up. You have a question.
Good morning. I'm sorry to disturb. It's not really a question. I couldn't attend the last three classes, but I'm up to date with the last two, with the first and second one. The third one, which is the last class, I haven't started it. So from time to time, I'm gonna answer some few questions. So is it okay for me to continue this class, or I should do the previous class? Then when you upload it on the YouTube, then I can continue from there.
Well, okay. I would say that you just stay on this class and then wherever you have questions, you just ask. But then after this class, you can still go ahead and watch the previous class video, right?
Thank
So
you.
I think that way it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So that way it makes a lot of sense. So instead of just leaving the class and then going back to watch two videos at the same time, you just watch one, and maybe you can come back and rewatch this particular one. Right? Any other question? All right. So no other question. Okay. So let's continue. So in our previous class, we looked at path parameter and we looked at query parameter, right? And basically we said about that parameters are basically means of sending in information to our endpoint. So I mean endpoint, I basically mean each URL, right? Each URL. So they are basically means of sending information to those URLs. And we talked about the two basic ones, which is the path and the query. So where the path parameter is somehow attached to the URL itself, right? So like this, right? So they become a part of the URL and needs to be specified, all right? They need to be specified and they cannot be optional. Okay, that's one thing about path parameter, and it's mostly used to identify a specific resource in our server, right? In our server. So a typical example would be, or a typical example where I would want to use a path parameter is, let's say I intend to get a specific detail about a specific block. I will likely pass either the block title or the block ID in the URL, right? I think that way it makes it is convenient for me, especially if it's just one piece of information, right? I would likely want to know what's pass it via the path parameter, right? But in a situation where I intend to pass in any other information, not necessarily to get a specific resource, maybe something like about that. I thought that we resolved this network issue at some point, but it seems that nothing in this country can completely be resolved. All right, so please let's continue. Let's continue, please. All right, so I believe that you guys are still seeing my screen, and you guys can actually hear me, right? Okay, so
We can
um,
hear you.
all right. So so I was saying, the two parameters that we've covered so far, right, are basically a basic means of what of sending data into our server. They are very basic, as this means is what only utilizes the URL. So it means that so far the only means of sending in data is via the URL, right? But in a situation where, of course, we want to actually send in a structured data. So when I mean structured data, I mean our JSON data, because by default, or most common, or commonly, information are mostly sent as in a structured data, especially if there are more than one, right? And let's say we have a collection of user details, which may comprise of username, first name, last name, email, and password, right? In that kind of situation, it's very abnormal to pass in all those things either as a path parameter or as a query parameter, right? I'm not sure that you would ever see any URL or any query, yeah, any URL that requires you to do what, to pass in your first name, last name, email, and creating password in the URL, right? It cannot happen, right? It can happen, but then it's not the right approach of sending in those kind of information. So in a situation where we intend to do what, to send in a structured data, typical example is our JSON data. Those kind of information are mostly sent in via the request body. Now, if you could remember, I thought that every request that we send to a server or to a URL comprises of three important things, right? The request type, which is post or get, and then the request URL, and then the optional body. So the optional body there is specifically used to do what, to send in structured information, which in this case our JSON data, right? So it's optional because there are some requests that we make that doesn't require that body part, right? But then there are also kind of requests that we will make that requires what, that body part. Now in this case, structured data are mostly sent via the request body. So now if you want to create a URL, right, that should accept or that should collect this data via the request body, how do we actually do that in Fast API? That's basically what we want to look at in today's class moving forward, right? So the thing here is that Fast API make use of a third party model library, or yeah, called Pydantic. So basically all data validation is done by Pydantic. This man. This is the man that Fast API uses to do what, to carry out all validation in your Fast API project. That is why if you look at our usual Python code, right? When we did type annotation like this, right? Python did not actually make it compulsory, right? But then if we now do it in a Fast API project, it makes it compulsory. Now, the reason for that is because of this man called Pydantic, right? So now, the same Pydantic also says that if data is to be sent in via a request body, that we have a different way of handling that data, right? So first of all, we need to create a class, right, that compares about of the attributes that should make up that data that we are expecting to come in via the request body. So what do I mean? I mean that let's assume that we have a JSON data like this, right? A JSON data like this, right? That compares the word of first name, right? First underscore name, and then the first name can be anything, right? Can be hello, or can be KodeCamp, assuming, and we can also have a last name, okay? And last name here can be, let's say, 5.0, and we can also have email. And email here can be KodeCamp 5.0 at gmail.com, right? And we can also have information like password, right? And password can be password, right? Okay, so assuming we have this kind of, assuming this is our structured data that we intend to send down to a specific URL. Let me simply create that URL down here. So I'll create a URL down here, or an endpoint, you could call it. And here I could just say user signed up, right? User registration, for instance, right? Now let's assume that this is all the information that needs to be sent in all at once, right? In a structured form like this, JSON, right? And then basically, so far what we've learned so far is basically path and query parameter, right? So it means that if we were to actually use a path parameter, that we will somehow need to have the parameter for each of these information here. But that's the first name, the last name, the email, and the password. Or we could either use a query parameter. But then I also said that it is not convenient, right? And it's not also recommended, right? You would never see a situation where you have to pass in this sensitive kind of information via the URL, right? So then this kind of information can be structured in a JSON format like this, and then sent in the request part, in the body part, in the body section of your request, right? So now, in this kind of situation, if we were to actually expect this kind of data, and then of course, since Pydantic is responsible for validating whatever comes into our server, Pydantic now says that in order for us to process this kind of information or this kind of structured data that is to be sent in the request body, please note that this structured data has to be sent in the request body, or will be sent in the request body. Now, to handle that with Pydantic, being that Pydantic is the core mechanism that handles all validation or everything that comes into your endpoint. So Pydantic says that you have to create a class. So I will simply create a class, and of course, that after that, to create a class in Python, we simply use what we simply use the keyword class, and then the class name. Maybe I could call this user registration, right? Registration, and then this class needs to inherit from a particular class from Pydantic called base model. Now, to inherit something, I think in when we did OOP, I'm not sure that we covered inheritance, but I also said that we should look up inheritance and think and polymorphism, if you could remember, right? I thought that we should look at that in our spare time. Now, the reason for that was so that when we come here, we can understand how inheritance works. Now, to inherit something from another class, right? We simply use open curly bracket, and then within that bracket we put in the class that we want to inherit from, which in this case is going to be a base class. This base class is from a Pydantic model, so that means we have to come up here and bring in Pydantic, that base class from Pydantic model. So we say from Pydantic, right? Because that is the man that handles all operation. We have to import what? Base model. Base model, this man here. So this is the class that all your classes that should handle any structured data should inherit from, because this is the class we will use for what for that we will use for what for validation. So I have to come back to our class and then pass in that class here as the inherited class, right? So base model, and then followed by what by color. This is the normal standard of creating classes in Python. The only thing that is different is that we've now inherited from this man called base class, right? And then within this your class, you know what, you go ahead and you specify the expected fields alongside with their validation. It's just that simple. So in this case where I am expecting what first name, last name, email, and password, what do? I simply come here and then call it first name, give it a first name attribute, right? And then here I can do what I can pass the variation. So I'll give you a very simple variation called string. So here I'm saying that that I am expecting a structured data. So when I mean structured data, I mean a data that's coming in what in JSON form and it's available what in the body section of that request. So you don't have to worry about how you would know if that data is in the body section. When that request comes to your endpoint, Fast API or Pydantic will automatically identify that body section and do what fetch out that structured data. And what happens is that it will match that structured data with what you have with what you've specified here in your class. So in this case, I'm saying that structured data should have a key called first name, which we have there, right? And of course, the value should be a string, right? And should also have a last name, okay? Last name, and of course, the last name should also be a string. And I can also have another one, email. So the thing here is that Pydantic will automatically validate all those fields one after the other without you writing additional code to make sure that each of these fields is valid, right? So with this, you can just wrap up your validation with Pydantic, right? So I could come here and say string as well. Don't worry, we will come back and we will see how we can validate this as actual email, because we have Pydantic has an email type, right? That you can use to validate emails. Basically, it means that if I want to validate an email, it will check if of course is a string and has at sign and should end with .com. I think that's a standard of every email address, right? It must be a string, right? And somehow it must actually involve the at sign and something and then .com, right? That's a standard of every email. And the good thing is that Pydantic has that kind of type that we can specify here, which I will show us, right? Which I will show us. But for now, let's leave it as string. Same thing with password here. So I will also expect password to be in that. I will also expect password to be in that structured data. Now, when I finish specifying this, which is what we finished doing here, what happens is that once a request is being sent in now, right, and then what happens is that Pydantic will go to the request, to the body section of that request, and then try to do what fetch the structured data and make sure that everything that we specify here is available there. So if there's one thing that is missing there, Python will automatically throw an error saying that we are missing this particular parameter. Or if we have a particular parameter that we pass in a wrong value, like an integer for first name, Python will automatically throw an error saying that the first name value is what should expected or was expected to what to be a valid string and not an integer and all those stuff. So it's just that simple, right? It's just that simple. So that is basically what you okay. That's basically the first step of doing what of validating and collecting a structured data. Now the second step is what is the variable that you have to specify in your function body. So I'll change this to user registration, with user underscore registration or user rec. Okay. So the next thing is I want to somehow um, data. I want to return data, and then I want to also put here data. Okay. Now data here is basically what any variable, right, that we can just put there. It's a function parameter, right? But then we can also remember that that if we specify any parameter in this function body, fast API will do what will automatically see as what as a query parameter, right? That's what you said now. That's why if you go back to our previous code, we said that a query parameter is basically what a function parameter, right? So if you give your route function any parameter, right, fast API will automatically see it as a query parameter. Are you together? I think that's what we established in our previous class, right? Let's communicate now. Let me make sure that we are fully his ministry. We said that that by default, if any parameter that you specify in your route function that's not available in your path URL, right? In your URL is automatically considered as a query parameter, right? That's what you said.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So that's basically what we said in our previous class, right? We said that if we specify if I come here, right, and change this to Q, comma A, these are basically parameters for this function here, right? So by default or automatically, fast API automatically, let me put this as comment, automatically fast API will see this as a query parameter. So it will expect that whatever that the request that is coming in, that something should somehow be attached to that URL like this, right? If you do this, right? But then if Q is also a member of your path parameter like this, right? Like this, then Q is now seen as a path parameter. But if it's not there like that, then both of them is seen as a query. That's basically what we established in our previous class, right? For those of us that know what that video, after this class, can go back and rewatch that video. That's basically what we said. That if you have a function parameter, let's say Q and A, and none of that variable is available in your path parameter like this, automatically it is seen as a query. It means that whatever is coming in or whatever data is coming in for Q and A should be attached after your question sign like this in the URL. But then if any of these variables is also available in the path parameter like this, right? Then Q is now seen as a path parameter. That's what we said. So now, if you come back again to what we have now, this man here, what we will be seen automatically as a query parameter. So now, how do we change that scope, or how do we make a fast API to see this man as a structured data that is coming in via the body section of the request? So the easiest way that can be achieved is or how that can be achieved in fast API is to simply typecast this man. So is to simply type annotate this man, right? And the type would not be our normal integer or our native data type. The type would now be what your class name. So I'll copy this class name and give it here as the type. All right. Now, when you do this, fast API will automatically know that whatever is coming in as data right, should be available in the body section of that request, right, and should also carry out this validation automatically by Pydantic. So that's basically the difference between part query and what and a request body, a request parameter, right? That's basically the difference. So data that comes in the body section needs to have a class like this specified for them, right? And then the variable that should hold that those values should be a type of that class that you've just registered or that you've just created, right? Well, path should be what should be available in a curly braces and also be available in the function itself. And then query is basically any parameter that lives within that function, your route function, right? Those are the difference between path query and what and a request body. Right. So now, how do we test this out? So the thing here is that in order for information to be a part of a to be in a body section of a request, it is mostly associated with a post request. So you cannot make a get request and have a body part and have a body section in that request, right? It's not possible, right? So body section is mostly available or associated with a post request. So that means you have to come back here and change this man to a post request. Now, why is it always available with post request? Because it assumes that you are sending data to a server, and when sending data to a server, it's mostly with post request. So it assumes that data that you are sending needs to be in a structured form, which in this case our JSON, and somehow it should be done via a post request. So when dealing with request body, you are mostly going to do what to use a post request and not get request. But when dealing with path and query, of course, you can send them via GET because those data what is being attached to the URL, not no big deal about them, right? They're not ordered, they're not arranged. They're basically what just attached to the URL, right? That's just the difference. So now, how do we test this out, right? How do we test this out? Let's go ahead and let's run our server so that we can know what test out this endpoint. So going back to our command prompt.
Yeah, why don't you comment all the stuff out?
Sorry?
I said, why don't you comment others out? Wouldn't there be an error if you don't comment them out? Like all other code.
Okay. Okay, the other codes, no, there will not be an error. I think everything is perfect except this other one that we've added. But every other endpoint there is still valid. So they will still become part of our endpoint, right? They will still become part of our endpoints for this product, right? For this particular parameter. Okay. So so basically we have about 1 and 2 and 3 endpoints for this particular project, right? For this particular project here. Okay. So they are valid. All right, Will, your hand is up. Will Smith, your hand is up.
Hello, that's like 12, 13, and 14. Can you give a brief explanation on it?
Line 12, 13, and 14.
I understand the app get and the dev. It's just the what you put inside the path, paragraph, and the greetings.
Okay, this whole section here, right? Okay, so let me run down and let me explain that again real quickly before we test this out. Okay, so we said about that if you watch the previous class or when you watch the previous class video, you will get to understand that what makes up an endpoint in Fast API. It's basically what the request type, right? The request type, which in this case could be type of error everywhere. The request type, which in this case we're talking about what? We're talking about either get or what or post, right? And then the path. The path here is basically what that portion that starts after your domain. Like for instance, we have about us, right? About us, right? So this is what path. And then the last part there is what is the endpoint function, or you could say route function. So this is what executes when a request gets to that particular route. So let's break down this man and see what is happening here. So this is basically what a typical example of how URL or endpoint is created in Fast API. So if you look at this man, these three things are available, right? We have the request type there, we have the path here, right? And then we have, this is a function, right? So this is a function that will fire up if someone make a GET request, right? If someone make a GET request to where? To this URL, to this endpoint, then this function here will do what? Will automatically fire up. That's basically what is happening there. So what I'm seeing here is that this is how this is a typical example of how we do of how path parameter works, right? So how do we send in information as a path parameter to our endpoint? We simply wrap that variable in a curly braces like this. So instead, it tells fast API that there is a value that should be passed in here before this greeting, and then there's another value that should be passed in there. Now that value is what is client's choice, right? So basically the client chooses what value is coming in there and here, right? And those value becomes what, or is considered or is seen as a path parameter. And what I'm well said about that path parameter, once we establish path parameter like this, right? They become a part of that, like they become a part of the, not part, like part as PRAT. They become part of that URL, right? So once we declare a path parameter, right, they become part of the URL. So that's basically what is happening in this portion of code here, right? So here we are saying that we're expecting two path parameter in this endpoint, and the first one is seen as a path param, and the other one is seen as another. I think in that previous class I was out of names, so I was naming these guys anyhow. But then the whole point is that this is a variable that should be considered as a path parameter. I mean that a client has to, or the client or the front end guys have to provide a value here, right? And then provide another value here to complete, or to make a complete endpoint, right? To make a complete endpoint. So typically, this is basically how this URL will look like at the end of the day. Something like this: HTTPS, right? And then colon okay, / www testing. Assuming this is our domain name, right? The domain name, and then slash. Then after the slash, what happens? What is a value is expected to actually come in there, right? So in this case, the value here can be username, right? / greeting / another value, right? There's another value that we are expecting here. So in this case, this other value can maybe age, right? I could say maybe age or email, right? So that comes in there. So this makes up the full URL. But then behind the scene, this is a value. This username and email here are path parameters. It means that those values can be changed, right? Those values can be anything, right? But then whatever is there, we simply extract it from this variable, right? And then we can do whatever we intend to do with those values within our route function. And then at the end of it all, we do what? We return a response that the client should get after sending a GET request to this URL. Is that understood, Mr.
Yes, thank you very much.
The wheels?
Hello, sir, did you hear me? Hello?
All right. Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Will. All right, so that is fine. So let's go back. Let's go back and let's go ahead and test our request, our JSON or our structured data or our request body, how I want to call it. All right, so this is what another endpoint that we just created that should do what? That should collect a structured data like this, which in this case a JSON structure. Okay, and then and then at the end of it all, we basically just want to do what? Basically just want to return the structure back, right, to the to the client or to the end users, right? So at this point, we need to actually use Postman, because remember I said about that your browser is configured to only send a GET request, so we cannot make post request and put in this structure, this thing, body like that, and send it via the browser, right? The browser does not have room to make that post request, so we somehow need to bring in a Postman, right? So I have my Postman open here, right? So I thought that we should download it. I think in a class before our previous class, I thought that we should install Postman, as we'll be using it to make some post requests. Okay, so I was assuming that we all have that installed, right? I was assuming that we all have that installed. So what I wanted to do now is to make a post request. So Postman here is a very simple interface that you can use to make API calls. So with Postman, you basically just put in you paste in the URL that you intend to send a request to, and then you choose the available request type, right? So far, Postman has all the available HTTP requests. We have the get, the post, the put, the patch, the delete, the head, and the options, right? So those are all the HTTP request type, right? But then I said about that for this beginner's track, we mostly focus on what on get and post, right? That's where we mostly pay our attention to. Okay, so but again, that's basically all, right? That's basically all. And then we have means in which we can we can we have means in which we can we have means in which we can actually hold on. I think my postman is looking weird. So we have means in which we can actually simulate sending request bodies, right? So that's one thing about Postman. It's very straightforward, right? Very, very straightforward. My Postman is looking weird for some reason. Hold on, let me just close this man and open it again. Just looking weird. All right, so let's open up Postman again. And while Postman will be coming up, we'll go ahead and we'll start our server. Right, so we'll bring up Postman. And while it's coming up, let's go ahead and activate our server. All right, so to activate our server, we are already familiar with this, right? We are already familiar with this means of doing this, right? So we have, first of all, we have our virtual environment active, so we are good to go. So how do we do this? We simply say uvcon, right? Uvcon, followed by the file that holds the entrance of your fast API, which in this case is parameter. That's the one that we want to execute. So let's be sure that it is parameter or parameters. Let's be sure. So it is parameters with S. Okay, and then let's go back to parameters, and then followed by a colon, followed by what? By the instance of your fast API. All right. So the instance of our fast API is what is in this man called app, right? This is the variable that holds this instance of what fast API, right? So every other thing. So the request pass from there down to any other route that we have along this script or along this file. So I'll go back again and I'll call this app. So as usual, I will not put the dash reload. I prefer to do mine manually. So I'll click on enter, and that should bring our server up and running. So let's go back. Okay, so we have that server up and running. Let's go back to our Postman and be sure. Okay, yeah, right now everything is looking just fine. Okay, so this is a wonderful thing about Postman, right? So you can you basically paste your you basically paste your URL there. That's your API endpoint, and then you select the request type, and of course we have the header section. So basically we have the header section of this request. So just in case we have a need to pass certain things via the header parameter, which we'll talk about, right? How header parameters work. And we have the body part of that request. So here you can choose we can choose sending information via the body part of the request. So these are mostly like the sections of of a full request, or what makes up a request. So by default, if you go to the header section, these are the things that Postman will add to that request automatically, right? Which is actually very normal, because most of the requests, so like I said, most of the requests, there are certain things, there's certain information that's being embedded in that request. Most of them, right? Most of your requests. So it's very normal. It's very normal if you come here and you see that there's some things that already exist there. There's absolutely no problem. And this is the body section of your request. You can choose however you want to send in this thing in the body section. So in our case, we are sending in as raw, right? So basically you want to paste in what our raw JSON structure there, right? So we simulate the whole process of sending in the JSON section, JSON data via the body section. That's basically what this interface is meant for, to simulate all those process, right? But then when external client, or should I say other developers want to send in this request, they have a means of doing it in their own programming language, right? But with Postman, we just want to do what, to simulate that whole process without going to do what, to start writing other part of another programming language just to test out our endpoint. So, okay, that's the benefit of using Postman. All right, so let's go back and let's test. So we have our endpoint as usual available here. So I'll copy this man, okay, and I'll come here and I will paste. Right, and so far the URL that we want to test, or the endpoint that we want to test, is the endpoint that ends with user registration, I think, right? Yeah, so we'll copy this URL. That's the endpoint that we want to do what, to test. So we'll go back to our Postman and we paste this man here, right? And then of course this man is expecting what? It's expecting a post request, right? So that means if I should click on send, this will tell me that what, that detail method not allowed, mean that what, that this URL is only accepting a post request and not a get request, right? So now if I should change this now to post request and then send this again, we should now see another error saying that we are expecting something in the body section of this request, but it's not available, right? So but it's not available. So you can say that what, that we are missing, something is missing, and is missing in the location part of this request, is missing in the body section, right? It's missing in the body section. So it means that what, that this man is expecting that you pass in certain things. All right, our first API, right, is expecting that what, that whatever request is coming into that endpoint should be a post request, and something should be available in the body section. So that is what is happening here. So now what do we need to do? We need to pass in our structured data, which in this case our JSON structure here, right? And then this JSON structure, right? This JSON structure, right, has to have a lot of things, so many fields, right? The fields that we specified here in our class here, right? So we have to have the first name field, the last name, the email, and the password field, right? So if I should go back again and make another request, this should not actually go through, right? Because we are missing certain things, right? So we are missing what? We are missing first name. So you can see with this, we've done a lot of variation already, right? We've done a lot of variation already without writing much code, right? Without writing much code. That is the beauty of Fast API in collaboration with Pydantic, right? Without writing much code, we've done so much validation, right? So let's go back and let's fill in this information, right? So I'll go back and then I'll copy what we have here and just go and paste, right? Because basically this is almost the same thing that we are expecting, right? I'll first cut this man and just go back here and just paste it there in the request body, right? Okay, and then paste this man. Okay, so and then I would simply do what I'll simply just go ahead and send. And then you see that actually went through, right? That actually went through, and of course we got back whatever we sent in, right? That's the beauty of Postman. So now you can see that that this is basically how we do what. This is basically how we send in structured data. This is basically how we send in structured data, right? We send in a JSON structure like this, right? And then because we're sending in more than one information, which is not really recommended to be sent in the URL. So the best way is sending it via the body section, and the body section can come in different form. It can come as a standard JSON structure like this. It can come as a form data, which I'll talk about how form data looks like, right? Now it depends on which means this information is being wrapped and sent, right? So it determines which we'll look at that soon, right? Which we'll look at that soon. But for now, we are expecting that information should be sent in as our standard JSON structure, right? The recommended means, right? The recommended means, or the mostly used, or the commonly used means of exchanging data, right? Barry, your is your question. Barry.
Sir, I don't really understand. I don't, sir. Are you hearing me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sir. I was saying I don't really understand what you're doing right now, because I thought that like we are the ones to type in the name and the first name and the last name and the email and the password. Like when you send the post request, the thing will now give us space to type in our own name. Like you don't, I don't like maybe you're like to be like as if you're registering on a website. You type in your own name and your own um password and your own email. That's how it's supposed to be. So you said that we are giving information to the
Okay,
server.
that
So
of course that's exactly how it's supposed. All right, if I hit your question, or if I understand your question correctly, so you were expecting that we have a means where we can basically type in all this information, right? That's the question, right?
yes, sir.
This combine. That's the question. All right, so
Yes, sir.
let me re-explain that. Okay, let me re-explain that process, right? So the thing here is that we are back-end engineers, right? That's basically our role. Our role is what is to build endpoints that should either collect, that should accept requests, process that request, and do what, and send out response. Okay, so let me break that down, right? So our job is what is to build endpoints, right? Our job is to build endpoints that will do what, that will collect, or that will not only collect, that will accept requests or accept requests, right? So by accepting requests, it depends on what, on the request type, right? Either what, post or get, right? And then do what, process this request, right? And that's where our function route function fires are, right? So we process this request, and then we do what, at the end of it, we do what, we send out response. That's basically our role as back-end engineers, right? We build endpoints that accept requests, process it, and then send out a response, right? So now the thing here is that we said that what that most times that most times this request can come with what, can come with data, right? So let me put something like, let's change this to method and data, right? So this request can come with method and what, and data. That is either post or get alongside with whatever data that's coming inside, right? And then we process those requests alongside with the data, and they will send out this response, right? So so that's basically our role. Now, what is the role of any other person? That is the client or the front end, right? Or their client or front end, right? What is their role? Their role is the what, is to send this request, right? Is to send the request, right? Send the request, right? Send the request, and do what, and collect response, right? So, and collect response. That's basically their role. Their role is what, is to send this request along, that is along as recommended by what, by our documentation, right? So if a documentation says that this particular URL only accepts get and pass parameter, then their job is to send this request as what, as get alongside what, we pass parameter, and somehow do what, wait for the response that what, that our server has to send back for them, right? That is our two distinct role as engineers. Okay, but then how will the front end send this data, assuming that they're sending they're sending a post request alongside with what, with the JSON data? How would they do that on their end? Well, they have a means of extracting your first name, last name, email, and password from where? From a form, from the form that they have and that they've built for the front end guys, right? So let me see if I can dive just very quickly in the front end, right, and show you how these things can be done on their own ends, right? But basically, this is not basically for our class, but for understanding sake, right? For general understanding of how this thing works. Let's just dive in and let's see how it goes. Okay, so how do front end guys build what you see on your browser? Like when you go to a particular endpoint, you see one wonderful web design alongside with form and all those things. So basically, every website that you see, right, is built with a markup language called HTML, right? Hypertext Markup Language. So every website that you see is running from a file that has .html extension. So you have something like, let's say, homepage, right? Homepage .html. This has nothing to do with Python, right? This has absolutely nothing to do with Python or backend. But where as a backend engineer, it's also expected that at least you have a little idea of how front end works. Same thing with front end, right? So basically, I think if you should say doc or HTML, right? This is basically how HTML and website is being built, right? So this is like a boilerplate, or let me say everything that lives within that page stays within what these two tabs, the body tab and the closing body tab. So everything needs to stay within that, right? Even I think they are like additional information about this particular web page, like this page title. So I can say this is home page. So now if I should now open up, okay, let's hold on. And then we have H1 tag, assuming, right? We have H1 tag, and I will say hello world, right? So it's so if I should now go back to my browser, let's go back to our source code. We have, you can see what we have homepage right here. Then if I open up this homepage, we should see a wonderful something, right? This is basically how website is being built, right? But then in addition to with other things like CSS and JavaScript, right? Basically, that's how front end website is being built, right? And most of the time, right? Most of the time, you can go to a sign up page, right? Where they tell you sign up, right? Sign up, and then there is a form that you can do what fill, right? Now to create that kind of form in HTML, they simply use what we call a form tag. There's a form tag here, right? There's a form tag that they have, and that they can provide for you to do what to fill. So I could say your first name, right? So you don't have to understand what this ministry does, but basically it's basically what happens behind the scene. Every login form that you go there and you see one beautiful login form. This is what happened behind the scene. This is what is happening, right? Behind the scene, this is what is happening. So if I should refresh that browser again, this will now show us a wonderful form. I said something is missing. So let's go back. Something is missing somewhere. Okay, something here. All right. Okay. All right. So let's go back. I think that's all. So let's go back. Let's refresh. Right, so we have a form like this, right? So you can type in something here. It's not too wonderful, but basically this is what happens behind the scene. And of course, they can customize this to be more beautiful, right? To be more beautiful. So I can have another one. I can have your face. I can have last name. I can have email. If I see need for it, email, right? And this should be email type, right? So this helps them validate stuff as well. So this is basically how they validate it on their own ends. And of course, they can have something we call CSS that they use in beautifying things. So a typical example is I'll just give us one typical example of CSS, right? So we have style, and this style is more like how do you want to design a particular tag. So if I should pick this man, so if I should give this man an identifier of ID, say first name tag, right? So I'll call this first name. You don't have to understand what is happening, please. So I'll call this first name, right? And then I'll copy this man and then come back to my CSS tag, and then I'll call this first name, and I'll somehow give this man let's say if I should say something like this, let's say I'm thinking I'm not really going to
try to cut you off. Your first is not correct.
Okay, the first is not correct. Okay. This should come here before this month, right? And this should also come here before this month. All right. So next thing is that let's say I give this man something like let's say so 100 pixel, right? So let's go back and let's see what's happening. So I won't really go into the detail, but then if I'm sure that if I should expand this thing, see that one thing is longer than the other, right? Let's go back and let's see something. Let's change it to 500. 500, and let's just give this maybe let's say border radius. I'm not really good. I'm not really good at this stuff, but we'll try our best. Okay, 30 pixel. It's not really my calling. My calling is more of backend. And then I can have let's say border color. I think there's a color. I think so. I'm not sure, but I think there's border. Okay, there's border color. I can give this red. Let's just go and see what happens. So I'm not showing that behind every web page that's basically what happens. So you can see what's happening here. So they'll just customize these things to look very wonderful, right? And then when you come here, you just go and type, right? You just type your first name, you just type your last name, right? Let's say Basi. You just type your email, right, and stuff like that, right? And then at the end of it all, you click on submit, right? But behind the scene, what happens? It is their job for them to do what, to extract whatever you've typed and do what, and wrap it as a JSON structure and send it to our server. That's basically what is happening, right? So let me come back here. Let me first put another div, and I'll put this button. Please, you don't have to really know what this thing means. This thing is for front end, but then if you want to actually learn it, you can in your spare time. You can actually look at what they do, right? So I can call this submit. So when you click on submit, this will somehow submit this form, right? This will somehow. So if I go back here and refresh, and I have button, right? And when I click, I can do what, submit the form, right? So what happens behind the scene is that when you type, they would somehow do what, extract those values that you've typed, right, and then wrap it as a JSON structure and then send it to our server. So now Postman now comes in to save us the stress of coming to build a front end that we can do what, type this value, right, and do what, and submit, right. So that's basically what Postman is doing. So it's coming in to do what, to avoid us from doing what, from building this thing. So Postman now stand in as your browser, and then our app now standing out as our server, and both of them can do what, can communicate. So I think for front end guys, what they will do after this form is they will somehow write a JavaScript code. So I have a script tag, and within the script tag, they can write a JavaScript code that basically fires up something once something happens. So I could just come here and then I could add on click. We don't have to do this thing, but this thing means a click event. It means that when someone click this event, something should, when someone click this button, something should happen, right? That's basically what that thing means. So basically, what I want to happen is that when someone click, I want to fire up my function. So I'll create this function in JavaScript, right? Right. So I'll come here and then I'll create a function called my function. This is how you create function in JavaScript. It's weird. It's not weird, but then it's different from Python. But this is how you create functions in JavaScript, right? So I'll call this man my function, and this man will not take in any parameter. And basically, what I want to do is this is where I can do what, I can start extracting all those values that you've typed in those fields, and then wrap it in JSON and do what, and send it out. You can see it's just that simple, right? So, but okay, let's just try this out and see how it works. Not really to collect data, but let's just find something else and do. So it's how you see what basically happens. So if I should come here, then what I will do, what I will grab a particular tag from the page. In this case, this tag, I want to call this tag first, right? So I'll call this is how you declare a variable in JavaScript. So you use let and then followed by a variable name, which in this case I'll call it first. And I'll say document. You don't have to know what this means, what this man does, but basically what the man is doing is that I want to get an element by ID. So basically it means fetch this element that owns this ID called first name, right? So that's basically what this man is saying, right? So get this element that get the element that the ID is what is first name, which in this case we have the element that whose ID what is first name here, right? So just basically get that element, and then I can do what I can choose to do whatever I want with that element. So I can simply just say so let's say I have, like, let's say first I have first name dot style dot display. So dot display, right? Dot display, and I'll call this should be equals to none. So I'll hide this thing when someone click on this button. I'll just hide this input field, right? I'll just hide that input field. Let's go back and let's take this out if it's working. So if I refresh this now, okay, so let's go back. So I'll cancel this man, cancel, and I'll go back one more time and I'll refresh. Okay, so if I click on this man now, you see Cinnamon doesn't seem to be displaying, right? So let's see what is happening. Because please, I would likely make some mistake because this is not really my ministry. Okay, so let's see what is happening. Let's see if you have any errors. So this is how you check for JavaScript errors in front end. Their errors somehow show in the console section of our browser. All right, but then if I should refresh, it happens that nothing is happening, but nothing at the same time nothing is still happening. For some reason, that means is not going anywhere. So let's probably I've done something wrong. Maybe I've done something wrong. I think so. Maybe. I can't really tell,
So
but
can't
it
it be
seems
because you're not putting any, like you're not including any name?
I'm not. No. It should not really be that because here I'm not saying once I click this function, this man should just hide. But basically, I believe that we somehow just get the whole concept, right? So basically, the whole concept is that the front end guys will build a form like this, right, where you can type in your name, okay, and then they write an event listener like this, saying that was someone click on that place, right? Where you click on your submit, right? What happens is that they will just do what fetch everything from that form, wrap it in a JSON structure. They have a means of wrapping things in JSON structure. So I think it's more like I can't remember. I think it's more like something dot justify, right? I can't remember but something dot justify. Then they wrap it in a JSON form, so that will convert that whole thing to a JSON standard, and then they'll make a post request with that thing now as a in the body part to our endpoint, right? So Postman actually comes into the world to save us from doing all these things, right? So the whole point is that our endpoint here, right, is expecting a JSON structure that should contain what first name, last name, email, and password. And of course, all of them should match this basic type validation. That's basically what is happening there, right? And then we do what we collect that data, we can choose to process it, and then at the end of the time, we do what we send back the response, right? So that's basically why we are using Postman. I don't know if I have been able to make things a little bit easy for us. So Mr. Gabriel, your hand is up.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm kind of confused because I was thinking that this fast API now, our motive is to collect data.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that we are working to receive data from users. Something like we will include something like input on our code. But now there's nothing like input on your this thing. You just copy. What if we want to? Okay, what if a calculation is included? Like something like we want to get the average. I thought that we will get the inputs, then do the calculation, then send the returns. So, but this one now, if you do it this way now that you wrote it now, it's like dormant code. We just write something that even say, but here now here now first names, last name is not specified. You just copied and pasted on that Postman. So I'm kind of confused. I don't even know what our ambition is on this particular code.
Okay, so I think I'm seeing the problem, right? All right, so please, let me use this opportunity to drag us out of Python basics. Please come out from Python basics. Let's learn in the actual words back-end development. All right, so I think before now, we are used to collecting data using the input function, right? But we've moved past basics of Python. Now we are dealing with actual web services. It means that data can only be sent in using a generalized web parameters, which in this case can be a path parameter, a query parameter, or a JSON body like this, right? So if I want to send data, if I want to collect data, I cannot use input in the web field, right? In the web world, I cannot use input. I can use any of the available parameters, either query, path, or request body. Right? Okay, so but I think what I did here was I just copied this thing and then I just pasted here. All right, so this is me saying that this is my JSON data, and this is the value of my first name, and this is the value of my last name, and this is the value of my email, and this is the value of my password. So in the web world, we cannot use input any longer, right? We've outgrown input and print, right? We can only return or use any parameter that we've done so far, either the query parameter or the path parameter or the JSON or a structured data like this as JSON format, right? we can no longer use input, right? So if I intend to collect data, I have to use any of the available web, any of the recognized web parameters, which can be your request body, that is sending it via the body section, right? Or the path via the URL, right? Or the query via the URL. Because the thing is that if I use input, it only works in my terminal, right? I cannot use it global. Like I cannot use it in web cases, right? So that is, I think that's where we are having problem. Please, so replace input function with all the parameters that we've learned so far, right? It's now your choice as the developer, which is the most recommended and convenient way of collecting certain information. So you now choose from the vast available parameters which one best fit the one that you want to collect. Now, if I intend to collect like a, let's say, category, right? I will mostly use what pass parameter. If I want to collect structured data like this, I will mostly do what use what JSON body, like the request body part, right? So it's up to you, right? So we can no longer use input again. So you have to do what you have to somehow do what replace the input function, right? The input function, replace it with any of the available parameters, right? With any of the available parameters. Please, is that understood? Please, we can no longer use this man again. We cannot.
So in this case now,
okay.
So in this case now, you mean that the data you want to accept, you must kind of depend on the front end devs, because that's where the data will be coming from,
Yes.
right? We'll be depending on them.
Yes,
now, when
that's
it comes to
the way the data will be coming from.
Okay, when it comes to something like a calculation now, because I think we'll be the ones to do the calculation. So how are we going to do it?
So let's
something like that.
Do that. Okay, so let me give us a typical example, right, of how this thing. But let's assume that what that I intend to do was to write to create an endpoint that adds two numbers, right? So let's say I intend to create an endpoint that adds two numbers, right? Assuming, which is too basic though, which is way too basic to do with the endpoint. But assuming that I want to create an endpoint that adds two numbers, number one and number two. Now, what do I do? Okay. Now, and I know about that I intend to collect two numbers. And since input can no longer work, I have to use any of the available parameters, right? So so far we've done query, we've done path, we've done request body. Which one would I now use? So it's now up to me now, right? Which one am I using? Which one am I using? I think maybe I should just write a Python script that actually did this thing. I think in our previous class there was one that we tested out someone's endpoint via Python coding, right? So maybe we can just do that. Maybe we can just do that. Okay, so I'll create another file and I'll just comment on this man out. And I'll import request. I think we have request installed in this man. Okay, I'll bring in request. So I'm not sure that request is installed in this particular virtual environment, right? So maybe we can just do that, right? So I'll just do pip install request. We already know how this thing works. So pip install requests. So the thing is that the values or the whatever data that we are expecting, right, is not coming from our terminal any longer. It's either coming from the front end guys or a fellow developer that can use his own script like this and do what and send in this request, right? Please keep that in mind that any data that you want to collect in your any data that you want to actually collect in your endpoint is no longer coming in as input. It's coming in as a web data. Either a structured JSON or it's been attached to or it's been attached to your URL, any of those things, right? So okay, we have our request now installed. So let's go back and let's make this request. So let me put this server. So I think we can make the request to this server, being the one that both of them are running locally. So I think that can work. Okay, so now let's assume that let's go back and let's build our endpoint. So I can, to build the endpoint that add to number, come here and do what? Create the URL, right? Remember, you must create URL for basically everything. So let's say add to number. Here we say add to number. So this is the endpoint called add to dash number, right? Add two numbers. Okay, that is the endpoint. So I can now come and choose between query path and body, request body, and request body, which is convenient for me and most recommended for getting what two numbers. For me, any of them is convenient because these numbers is not as if they are sensitive information, right? There's nothing sensitive about what these two numbers. So I can choose with what query, I can choose with what path, I can even choose with request body. But at this point, I don't really think that what that request body is most convenient because like I said, there's nothing sensitive about it. So because request body is somehow encrypted and not available and doesn't actually show in your URL. So that's why if you have any sensitive information, it's mostly recommended that is sent via the request body. So I will go with what? I'll go with query. I'll go with query parameter, right? So I will collect my num1 and I'll collect my what? I'll collect my num2, right? And of course, remember num1 and num2, as far as those two variables are not available in this part, right? It makes it what? A query parameter. It means that that the value of num1 and num2 has to come after what? A question mark sign in the URL, right? So now how do I do this? So after this, I can do what? I can simply come here and just add them, right? So I can just say result, right, should be equals to. So I will somehow typecast this man. So I'll add integer here, right? So that it automatically makes sure that whatever is coming in, sorry, it should be colored. That I can make sure that whatever is coming here should be integer, right? So you save us just from writing unnecessary code, right? So from here I can simply do what, just add num1 plus num2, right? And then at the end of it all, I will just send back a response, right? And the response here is what? Result, right? And I'm done. Now to do what? To collect this information, the user has to do what? How to send a GET request, send it to GET via what? To this URL, and then provide what? And then using query parameter should provide what? Num1 and num2. And from there, we can carry out this calculation and send out the response. All right, so let's go back and let's test this out. So I will refresh my server again. Remember, we've added a new code. So you should catch up with that new code. So I'll go back here. Okay, yeah, and then I'll just make my request. So I'll say rq equals to request dot get, right? So remember, this man has literally all the methods. So there's dot get, there's dot post, there's dot everything. So but the required thing is what is the URL? The URL that we need to do what to pass in, right? So that is only the required thing here, the URL. So I will do dot get, and then my URL here is what I will come up here and provide my URL, which is going to be what? Our localhost URL. So I will come here and copy this man. Paste it, and then slash. The endpoint here is what is add to numbers. So go back and then paste this man here, and then pass in the URL here. So if I should somehow now print request, this should now show me what the status code. Remember, whatever is coming in is coming. Is coming. We have to do what? We have to unbundle it via what? To the JSON response. So if I should come here and run this code again, I have to push this control. This control is not still hiding on my end. All right, so if I execute our file as a normal Python script, so this should now go ahead and send in request, which is taking time. Let's hold on. So we have 422. So 422 means something is wrong somewhere. So let's go back and let's see our terminal. I think we process entity. All right, so we have a problem. Remember, this man, this URL is expecting two numbers, right? Num1 and num2, and these numbers have to come in as query. So how do we do that? We go back and we pass the query called after the question mark sign. So I'll say num1 should be equal to what 10. And remember, if you have more than one, you have and sign. You have use that the ampersand sign, and num2 should be equal to what 20, right? And then if I should now send this request again, this should now go through as expected. So you now have response of what of 200. So the request went through, right? But then to actually see the actual result, you can say .json, right? And this will do what? This will unpack it and convert it to what to our native dictionary in Python. So if I should now do this now, click send this request again, and I have response of what of 30 as a dictionary, right? So what do I mean? I mean that every time we want to collect something, that thing needs to go in as a request, and you can use any of the available parameters that we find convenient, right? So in this case, we use what I used a query parameter, right? If I was to use a structured form, because so far this man is not structured, right? So far this man here is not structured. It's just a bunch of information passed in the URL, right? So if I intended to pass this man as a structured information, what do I do? That is to send this man via a body section, which body section is mostly associated with what we post request, right? Body is mostly associated with post request. So what do? I can simply come back here, right, and clean this man and turn it to post. All right. Maybe I should answer the question first before I proceed. Please, Fidelis, ask a question. So I know. Go ahead and ask.
Okay, when you first sent the request, this response that came in 200. Where is the 200 coming from?
The first time I sent time I sent the request, what I had 422. Yes, so it means that there's a problem with that request. That request was not sent successfully. So the thing was that we were missing our required. Remember, we said that this man, it must take in two numbers as query, and that time we missed those two numbers. But that is why that show us an error code of 422, right? So we came back and we fill it in and send again, and then we had 200 as response code, right? As success response code.
Why are we getting 200 as?
Sorry?
Why are we getting 200 as response rather than 30?
Okay, so the thing is that of course your response also comes in two parts. It comes with the response body alongside with status code. So this response that is being sent here, right, comes in two parts, right? So the first part it comes with is the status code. So every response from a request comes with a status code, right? Comes with a status code, right? Status code alongside with what? With the response body, right? So every return response that you have in any API call comes in two forms like this, right? That is your response code, sorry, your status code and your response body. So every status code in web development has its meaning, right? So 200 means success. It means that the response was like the request was success and the response was sent back as expected, right? And then you can know what, and then there's also what a response body. So if you have any other code outside of 200, then there's a problem somewhere, either with the request not going through or the request went through but the response not coming out, and so on and so forth, right? So that's basically what happens behind the scene. Right. So when we now print the response, you likely see the response code. So to now see this response body, you have to pass in what the JSON function to do what? To grab this JSON body from that response. Right. So that's basically what we did. So we now come here and then we now added .json, which now grab the actual response and not the status code. Is that understood?
Sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. Gabriel, your hand is up.
Oh, sorry. It seems like I'm kind of not understanding what's going on, Sha. I just want to ask something.
Okay.
This get now seems like it replaces the input that we used to use before now.
You mean this get here?
method. Yes.
This get method here?
It is the code, is the this thing that collects data, ba?
You mean the get method here? This get method?
Yes, it collects data, ba? It's kind of input.
Not necessarily kind of input, but it's not a kind of input, right? So remember, I said, okay, let me put it down again.
Okay, before you explain all of that, let me just ask one so you can explain. Okay, this apart from this one now, you generated URL and pasted it here. So what if we are asked to solve, like to make addition only? There is no other code attached. So are we going to generate URL first before processing this code? And secondly, why didn't you use Postman? So I was kind of waiting for you to use Postman. That's when you run this code and get this URL, you run it on Postman. That's what I was kind of thinking. So can you just clarify?
Okay, all right. So let me Google up something for us. Let's Google up something. Right. So I think this will help us. So I'll Google up two things, right? I would say what makes up an HTTP request. Let's see if I can have something in the front page here. Right, so okay, it's generating. So let this AI generate, right? So exactly. All right. Okay. So yes. So this is basically what. So remember, we are dealing with web development. So basically, okay. Let's go over these things one after the other. So let's drag ourselves out from basis of Python. So I think that is our main issue. We are still stuck in Python basic, right? But we've left Python basic behind. So let's drag ourselves out now. Okay. So now we've moved to what? Let me see if I can combine my screen, kind of like put it side by side, right? So I'll put this man one side and I'll put this other man one side, right? So I believe that is showing just fine. All right, now this thing is still showing. I don't know why this man is showing. This thing is not just hiding, it's floating thing. Hide floating man. Okay, so I think that has been hidden. All right, okay. So let's hide it again. Hide video panel, hide floating meeting control. All right. Okay, so I've hidden our floating meeting control. So it means that if your hand is up, I may likely not see it. So please, if your hand is up, just unmute and ask the question. But that thing is blocking me. That thing is blocking me. It's not going. All right. So let's look at it again. All right. So we've moved past what Python is. Please let's pay attention, right? So that we don't go back and forth again. All right. So we've moved past what Python basics, right? We've moved past Python basics. Okay. Where input function, right, is for collecting data, right, and print, right, function is for showing or sending data, right? It's for showing data. Are we? All right. So we've moved past this man, right? This man is far behind us. Right, and that is a fantastic job that we've done there, making this man to be far behind us. Now we've moved towards to building of API, which is our core responsibility as back-end engineers, right? Back-end engineers, right? That this is our core responsibility of back-end engineers. We do what? We build API, right? Now that we've arrived in building of API, everything changes, right? The whole concept of input and output using basic functions like print and input have to change, because we are no longer doing what running, or we're no longer building system that will only execute in our terminal, right? So imagine that you have to go and use Facebook, and then Facebook will not tell you go to your terminal and go and log in. It's weird, right? It's really weird. Or let's say you try to make a post in Twitter, and then Twitter tell you go to your terminal and go and put the post and then send it from terminal. It's weird, right? It's really weird. So now we've moved past those basics. So because we've moved past those basics, terminal does not really do all the work again, right? We have to look for other means of doing what, of getting input, processing it, and doing what, and sending it out, because that's basically what the whole process of software engineering is. You collect input. What makes a working system an actual working system? What is that system must do what, must be able to do what, collect input, process it, and do what, and send out output. That makes a complete working system, right? So because we've moved past Python basics, terminal for input and terminal for output doesn't really solve, or should I say do the work any longer. So you have to do what, we have to use other means of doing what, of collecting input, and also other means of doing what, of sending out output, right? So what is the whole point of being a back-end engineer? Is to do what, is to write scripts that should do what, that should run behind the scene while maintaining the client's visual interface, right? So our job is not really the visual interface somehow, but our job is to do what, is to provide resources that should be available on the visual interface. That is our job. So if you now narrow it down again to what, to back-end engineer with web development, because there's back-end engineer with app development, right? Because there's someone that builds back-end, but specifically for app development, you get for app. So it means that even with that, it still means that the person still needs to do what, make API calls, right? The person still need to make API calls. So the whole point what is for us to write a code base somewhere that either a web developer or an app developer or whatever developer at all can do what, can send requests to, right? Can send requests to. So it means that in order to build this API, we somehow need to have what? We somehow need to have first thing, we somehow need to do what, have two things available. So one is what is URL, right? One is URL, and one is what is making of requests. Is accepting of requests, kind of accepting requests, right? So let me come over it again, right? So I said that we've moved past Python basic, right? And then we've now moved away to a phase where we fulfill our actual responsibility as back-end engineers. And as back-end engineers, two things must be involved: the ability to create URLs, right, or to generate URLs, like Mr. Gabriel said, right? The ability to generate URLs that should do what, that should accept requests. Are we follow up to that point? That our duty as backend engineers is what, is to generate URLs. Of course, it can be more than one. So URLs that should do what, that should accept requests, right? And somehow do what, send out response. Have we arrived at this point? Have we arrived at this point? Have we followed up to that point? All right, fantastic. Now that we followed up to that point, we are coming out from Python basics small. Get we all right. So now that we've understood that as a back-end engineer, your core responsibility is to generate URLs, and this URL must accept requests, and this URL must also send out response. It is a must that these three things must be fulfilled as a back-end engineer. Now, because these are URLs, right? Because these are URLs, it means they are more like a generic means of communicating. It means that someone that is building a web application can make requests to URL, right? The front end, a web developer, someone that is building wonderful web pages, can do what? Make a request to a URL. and then and get response. Someone that's also building app development can still make what a request to a URL. So this URL now become, or this means of creating URLs now become more like a generic means of communicating with whatever application, be it desktop application, be it app application, be it web applications. Are we following up to that point? Are we following up to that point?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Now that we follow up to that point, it means that in order for this, in order for our URLs to be more effective, that these URLs need to somehow do what? Collect data and process data, because that is what makes a full system, right? If I'm building web application, my web application should be able to do what? To send, to collect input, process it, and do what? And send out output. Same thing with app application. Same thing with what? With desktop application. Whatever application at all, it should be able to do what? Collect input, process it, and do what? And send out output. That's basically what makes a working system, right? That basically what makes a working system. So now that we have this URL available for all users, but for all usage, now how do we now send in data, right? How does this URL? Because if someone is building a web application, that application should be able to collect data, process, and do what? And send out response. But most times web application is not really complete, or should I say cannot stand alone and collect this data and process it and do what? And send out this response. It is limited, right? The resources for building just the front end alone is limited to doing all these things. So that means there has to be a way of these front end guys collecting the data on their ends, right? Making it look as if it's the system that is collecting this data, and somehow send this data somewhere for processing, and somehow get the result of that processing, and then and send it back to their client from their own system, without it looking as if the client needs to move from their system to some other place to get the process information, right? That's basically the whole point. So now, how do this data now come into this URL? Because we've moved past the pattern. So because we've moved past Python basic, right? How do we now collect this data, be it from a web application, desktop application, or mobile application? How do we now collect this data, right? And then we process it and then send out a response. So that is where if every request that is being sent, right, has to somehow come with parameter, right? Every request has to come with parameter. That is if this URL or if this endpoint, we will be accepting data, right? We will be accepting data. So what makes what makes a request valid is that this request has to comprise of the URL, okay, of the request line, which is mostly what the HTTP method, the URL, and optionally the version, right? So this particular part here is more like is added automatically, so you don't really have to actually worry about that particular point. So it means that in order for any application, so let's come up here, let's put any application. So it could be app, it could be web, it could be desktop, right? In order for this application to make requests to our URLs, which is here, these people have to somehow make sure that they have to specify a request method, okay, or just a HTTP method, right? And then they also have to specify URL, right? And they also have to specify headers. So this thing here is getting even more okay, let's group it like this. So say a method of sense. So we have to also have HTTP method. No, not really method. Request line. Let's put it as request line, right? And then this man also has to have headers if need be, and this man has to have the message body, right? The message body, which is, of course, you've seen the what is optional. Let's say shift. All right, let's hold on. Shift tab. So let me bring this man here, and then the message body. All right. So let's continue. Okay, so it means that whatever application that needs to do what to interact with our endpoints, because this application can come in from either what web application, app application, or desktop application, that their requests, right? Their requests needs to do what needs to comprise of these three things. But I can tell you for sure that these two things there are optional, because so far we haven't actually added anything to header. But this basically one makes up a request, right? This basically one makes up a request. So because we've moved past Python basic, it means that anybody that wants to send or to interact with our system needs to make a request, right? For you to interact with our system, that interaction needs to come in as a request, right? And what makes up a request? We have what the request line, the headers, and the optional message body. But I can tell you for free that these two things are optional. It's optional because if the endpoint doesn't actually require it, you cannot send it, right? If our endpoint says we don't want header, we don't want body, you cannot send it for us, right? So that makes it optional. But you see this request line, you see this request line, right? The URL and the method type is compulsory, right? The URL and the method type, right, is compulsory, right? Is compulsory. These two things are compulsory, right? These two things are the most compulsory things that every request must have. So let's reiterate again and let's go over it again. So you said that as back-end engineers, right, that our job is to do what? Is to build endpoints, which in this case URLs, and of course, to make this system a working system, right, or a functional system, this system has to do what? Has to accept requests and do what? And send out response, right? So it means that whoever needs to interact with our system doesn't need to go to terminal any longer, because we know what we've gone through, what we've passed through what Python basic. So it means that to interact with our endpoints, you cannot go to terminal and do what? And type in things on the terminal, right? That cannot work any longer. So it means to interact with our system, that one or a developer or a client needs to do what? Needs to make a request, right? We need to do what? Make a request. And what makes up this request? The URL and the method. So it means that is somehow aligning with our system, because our system is basically doing what? Generating URLs that should do what? Accept request. So in this case, when I mean accept request, I basically mean what? The method type. So you're beginning to see that whatever the front end guys is somehow trying to do, our endpoint is somehow doing what? Making those things to be what? Available for them to do what? To carry out those operations, right? So it means for them to interact with us, they have to do what? They have to have this URL that we generated so far alongside with what each of the available URLs is accepting. That is the method type. Do you understand up to that point? Do you understand up to a point where I said that we can no longer do what? Interact with our system via the terminal, but then via what? Via a request. Do you understand up to that point?
Yes.
All right. So let's continue again. Okay. So having understood that these people are no longer valid or are no longer effective as they should be. So it means that we cannot use them any longer, because if we use them, this man has to what is going to execute on the terminal, and because we are front end engineers, terminal is no longer the way forward. But we can use them if we intend to know what to test some things in the terminal during development phase, right? But then when we push out these things into production, they are no longer what? Valid. So having it in mind that in order to interact with our system effectively, that one has to do what? One has to make a request, and what makes up this request is what? Is the request line, the message, and the message body, and what? The headers. And I said that these headers and request body, right, is what? Is optional, right? They are optional. So I'll just bring this man down here. They are optional. So it means that they can only be required if our endpoint does what? Actually requires them, right? If our endpoint actually requires, but if our endpoint does not actually require them, we cannot use them. But as far as our endpoint is concerned, our endpoint our endpoint must do what? Must require what? This mean the URL and what? And the method type. It is compulsory. We can, in fact, if you take these two things out, there is no endpoint, right? If you take these two things out, there's no endpoint. You are basically just building function that should do what? That should execute in your terminal, right? And we do not want that, right? We do not want that. So we have what? We have the request alongside what? With this. So now let's proceed from there. Now that we know that to interact with our system, one has to do what? Send a request. A request is required. All right. A request is required to do what? To interact with this man. Now, how do we now start generating this URL? Already we've seen that, right? We've seen that is how we do what? We generate these URLs in what? In fast API. So each URL that we generate, right, comes with what? Comes with the URL, right, alongside what? With the method. So that means we've solved this man. We've basically done what? We basically solved these two things, right? Now the response now is what your function here does, right? The response is what your function here does. So that means we have a full working URL. We have a full working URL. Now the problem is that now, how do we now send in data? Because so far what we've established here is what is a basic URL and means of interacting. Now, how do we now send in data? How do we send in data, right? How do we now send in the data? Okay, so knowing that to interact with this man down here, right, that one has to do what? Use what is up here, which is what? The request. Now, how do we now send in data? Now, how do we send in data? So now, because in order to interact with our URL, a request must be sent. So you mean that data has to be sent alongside with that request. Are we following up to that point? Now that we've understood that in order to interact with our system, right, a request needs to be sent. Right, that is the only means of interacting via request. So now being that request is the only means, it means that whatever we intend to send in has to come in with that request, right? There's no other means of sending that data. That data needs to be attached or bound to that particular request. Have you understood up to that point? Let's unmute and let's communicate now. Have you understood up to that point? Or am I singing songs of Solomon?
This last one, yes.
Okay, this last point. Okay,
I don't know.
All right, so let me re-explain that last point again. All right, so I said that every request, right, that every means of interacting with our system is via a request, right? And what makes up a request? A URL and the HTTP method, right? You take those two things out, then there's no request, right? Every request must have the URL and the HTTP method. So now, having in mind that every interaction needs to be done with a request, it means that, or it also means that every data that needs to come into our URL that we generated also have to come alongside with that request. Because when that request comes, when that request comes, what happens is the accepting and processing of that request, and then finally the response. So there's no other external room that we can do send in data except the incoming request. So that means in order to send in data, we have to do we have to find any of this portion of this request, either in this request line or in the header or in the message body, somewhere among those three things, and attach in our data there and send it to that URL. Do you understand up to that point?
Make a U-turn, then turn right.
Yeah, yes, sir.
All right, so we understood up to that point. That's fantastic. Right, so now that we've understood up to that point, and we also understood that these two things here are optional, right, and only required if and only if there is need of using them. So a typical example when we want to actually use these two things is data, right? It means that we want to do send in data, and of course data can be sent in either using any of these three things, either with the request line, or with the header, or with the message body. Data can be sent in via those three parts of your request. Now, how do we now bond this data to that request, so that as the request is coming, it comes alongside with that data? That can be done via parameters in not really in fast API, but in the concept of web development, right? Via parameters. And we have what we so far we've covered two of them. We've covered the path, we've covered the query, right? We've covered the body, right? The body. Okay, so now how does this type of data, where do we bond, or where do we attach this type of data to the request, so that it comes alongside with our with the request to our application? All right, so what you should know is that the path and the query can only be bound to the request line. All right, so let me see if I can bring this down. Right, so let's bring this man down, and let's also bring this man down. Right, so the path and the query can only be attached to the request line, right? But the body, of course, from here you can see that this man can only be attached to that man, right? So far, those are the three parameters that we've covered so far, right? So it means that your request can have optional parameters, right? Which in this case, the query, the path, and the body. But then your request must have a URL and the HTTP type. But if in a need where data has to come in to our system, that data has to be tied to that request, so that it comes alongside with the request to our system. If not, there's no means of sending data there, right? Because we've done we've moved past basics of Python programming, right? So that data has to be attached, or shall I say tied or attached to the request, right? And we've covered three types of data, or shall I say three types of parameters, or shall I say means of sending this data via request. So we've covered the query, the path, the query, and the body. And I said that the path and the query can be attached directly to the request line, right? That is to the URL itself, right? Those two things can be attached there and then sent alongside with your request down to our endpoint. So let's go back again and let's take one human being, for instance. So let's assume that we have this URL called greetings. I will assume. Okay, let's go back. So I assume that we have a URL called /greetings, right? So remember, every URL, or what makes a complete URL is what is the domain name alongside with the specified parameter. So it means that what makes this man a complete URL is that there is an invisible domain name behind this man. So let's say www.KodeCamp.com, right? That's basically what is there behind the scene, right? But I'll take it off, right? I'll take it off. But then in your mind, in your mind, know that this endpoint here is not complete without that domain name, right? So there must be a domain name that this man is being attached to, right? So let's assume that this is one of our endpoints in our URL, right? So this is our URL, and this endpoint, remember, what makes our system a working system, that this man must have a URL and must have a specific kind of method, which in this case I can say that this man should take in a GET request, right? Assuming that this man should take in a GET request. So this is this is a valid URL, right, in our system. So it means that to interact with these endpoints, I have to send the request. Remember, every interaction comes as request, right? So I have to send a request. But in order to send this request, right? Let me bring this man down. In order to send this request, right? Let me bring this man down. You have to send this request down there, right? This request has to do take two important things, right? The URL and the specified method. Now, this method is not just established out of the blue. This method, it comes as the result of what is specified in someone's endpoint. So if our endpoint says make a GET request to this URL, you can only make a GET request to that URL. There's no other magic around it, right? Because it's our system, we know what we're expecting and how we intend to process that particular request. So in this case, it means that I have to come to my request, right, and do what and provide, remember, the URL, right? So in this case, I would say the URL here is what is greeting. So I'll copy this man, right? Give it the URL, right? Okay, not that. All right, give it the URL, okay? And then after that, I can do what? I can give it the request type, which in this case is what dot get, assuming, right? Assuming. So this is the method, this is the URL. Those are the two compulsory things, right? But then if I should send in this request now, it will go through, right? But then it will go through without sending any data, or should I say without carrying any data alongside itself. So it just goes as request and comes back as response. Nothing was sent, but something was what was received, because every successful request, you must get a response, whether data was sent or not, right? So now that we established that, now how do we now send this data, right? So you have to do what, somehow attach this data to the request itself. Now, depending on your medium of sending in that data, right? So that means if I should choose path parameter, I said, and then I choose that I want path to be a medium of sending data to my server. So what do? I can simply say, okay, when creating this endpoint, I can simply come here and say, probably after typing this endpoint, just add slash whatever slash data there, right? And then this data here is what I will collect as a data that is coming into my server. So now what do I now do? I have to go back to my means of interacting, which is what this request, right? And then do what, specify the endpoint alongside with the method. And because this endpoint has now established the fact that whenever I want to send this request, I have to provide value as part of a parameter, right? And that value as part of the parameter can be seen as a path parameter, right? So I have to come back here and do what, and make a / and provide that data, so that when I send in this request, that data goes alongside with that request via the URL. And remember, I said that path and query can be attached directly to the URL. So I have to come back here and not put maybe / something and then put in what I need to type in. Let's assume here my name. So I put in server here, right? So this looks like a complete URL, but behind the scene, this is the data that is being sent into our application, and somehow we can do what, extract it from there and do what, and work with it. Do you understand up to that point?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any question? Any question? All right, so the silence means there is no question. All right, so that is one way of sending data to your server, right? That is one way of sending data to your server, right? That is one way of sending data to your server. Now, the other way is what is called query parameter, right? Now, same thing happened again. This method of sending information has to do what, to be attached to the URL, right? But then it's different, right? It's different because this man can act as not being part of your URL. So it can be optional, you can choose not to be optional, right? So that means to send a query parameter, or should I say to send data via a query parameter, you have to go back to your URL and do what, and add a question mark sign, and then after that you do what, you specify the query parameter name alongside with the value, right? That's how query works. So in this case, if our system says that we're expecting data as query, right? So what I can come here and do what, and say data equals to what, the value, which in this case what is Savior. So now you go see the difference between what query and path, but then all of them is what is still sent in via the URL, is attached to the URL itself, right? And then when you now make that request now comes alongside with those values, right? So when you now send this request in my endpoint, right, I can know what, I can extract this value, right? So this is the data that is being sent. I know what, I can extract it and know what, and work with it, right? That is basically how you interact with what that's basically how you interact with that's basically how you interact with your URL, with your API, because what we've moved past Python basic. The fact that when you put it in mind that you've moved past Python basic, that the only way of interacting now is via request, it becomes easier, right? Because you know that there's no means of sending data, or sorry, of sending data or information to your URL without any of those parameters. Without you cannot send it via the input function any longer. So it means that need to do what, attach it to the request itself and do what, and send it alongside, right? And then from there we can process it. All right, Mr. Will, your hand is up. Oh, we've even finished class since. Mr. Will,
Almost done. Can you just explain this query and paths again one last time? It's confusing me.
So query and path is two different types of parameters, and two of them are all means of sending information to endpoints. Both of them. The difference is that path is attached to the URL itself, right? Path is attached to the URL itself. So if you've seen a website where we have something like this, like www.site assuming.com, right? And then we have /category, right? Category, right? Now, if you go to this kind of site, assuming, right, you may have a category of, let's say this site deals with, let's say this site deals with books, right? Now, if you go to this site URL, right, you may see something like fiction, and you may see comedy and all those stuff, right? But then if you now click on fiction, if you look at your search bar, it somehow changes to like category /fiction, right? And then if you now click on, let's say, comedy, this man is not from fiction to what, to comedy, right? So something like this. So what is happening there is that this man here, this last value here, is a path parameter. It's a part of the URL that makes up a complete URL. But behind the scene is what is a path parameter. It's a value that can change, right? Remember, your URL is a fixed value, right? Like now, if I have www.site/category, this is a fixed value, right? You cannot change that category. But then if you have a URL that where one part of that URL keeps changing, right? It means that part that keeps changing is a path parameter, right? It means that the value can be altered, right? The value can be altered, and somehow that value is used behind the scene for fetching specific information, right? So that is basically what path parameter is, right? It's a means of sending information attached to the URL, right? But then for query is like this. Query doesn't need you to do what, to attach it to this URL like this, or should I say it doesn't complete the URL, but path parameter does what, complete the URL. But query doesn't really complete the URL because with query you can choose to leave it optional, like empty, right? But with path, once there is a URL established that must collect path, that URL must collect the path parameter. You cannot remove it because what, it becomes part of a complete URL. But with query, you can choose to put it, you can choose not to put it. But then how do we now use a query parameter? So to use query parameters, you simply go to your URL and then you put it after this sign, your question mark sign. That is, it is a standard across all web development. So if you've seen some URLs, you see that what some URLs has a question mark inside there, and then some values now follow after that question mark. Those values that follow after that question mark is a query parameter. It means that the server is using those values to somehow do what, process your request, right? That's basically what query parameter is, right? So it comes after your question mark like this, and then it comes in paste. It comes in the parameter name, right? Parameter name alongside with what, the value. That's how query parameter comes, right? It comes like that. It comes in paste. So if my parameter name was Q, so here would be Q, and then the value here could be maybe something like the value here could be something like maybe comedy, right? Comedy. That is how query parameter works. But both of them, right? Both query and path is used for what? For sending data via the URL. Remember, this thing happens what, in the URL line. So that man is using what, in sending this thing via the URL, right? That's basically how they work. That's the difference between both of them. One is compulsory, one is not compulsory. Part is compulsory, right? And why is part compulsory? Part is compulsory because it becomes what it becomes part of a full URL. So without it, that URL is not complete. That's how part works. But query is optional, right? So I can choose to take this man off. As far as the backend said that this man can be optional, I can choose to take this man out, and it will still work, right? It will still work. That's basically how query works and part. All right. Right, Mr. Barry, your hand is up. Question.
Okay, sir. Sir, you hearing me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. Shoot.
I don't know if you'll be able to understand my question because even me, I don't understand what I'm about to ask. So the question is,
How do you not
like,
answer what you don't
you
understand?
say we have been doing so far since on Monday. We are the ones that will be editing the URL when we are on the this thing, or we are on our browser. We'll edit it and put what we want to happen. But is that what we were doing since?
Sorry, please. Wait, I didn't get the question completely.
I
You said
mean,
that
like
what happened to our
on Monday,
oh,
right? When we run a URL on our browser, we'll be the one to edit the part and put what we want, like the query part and put what we want. So you understand now?
yes, of course, of course. Yeah,
Okay, so
definitely.
on normal
Okay, so what?
in the website now, normally we are not the ones that always edit the URL. So why is it always like that?
Like
Do you
if you go
understand?
to website,
Yes,
you're not the one that edits the URL.
yes, but here we are the ones that edit it to show us what we want to see. But on a normal website, if I go to a normal website now, we don't edit the URL. It just comes up.
Yeah, that's because the front end guys have automated all those things for you. They've fixed in the required value. So you just click button and be going. But then if you keep clicking button, keep observing the URL, yours change, right? For each button that you click, you have a different URL with own parameters. So and that's basically the job of front end guys to ease these things for you. But here we have to test our own URL and make sure that it is working. So in order to test it, since the front end guys are not with us, we have to manually test it by ourselves, right? That is the reason why we keep editing our URL. But once our API is ready and the front end guys or whoever we intend to use it, they will do what they will automate all those things for the end users. So the end user doesn't need to go and be editing anything there, right? That is basically that. That's basically that, right? So you don't
Okay,
the reason why we are editing is because we have to test it, right? Apart from that, we wouldn't even need to be editing it, right? Apart
okay,
from
sir.
that, yeah. All right. Any other
So,
question?
yes, you didn't actually answer the last question I asked about the addition. You know, you copied URL of one and added it somewhere. Do you get? So I thought you
Okay.
would
So
use only one URL.
okay, so let's just look at let's just, so now the reason why I did that was that so that let me show you that this request can still be automated with Python. So basically the purpose of Postman is to test this URL. That is just its purpose because Postman has all the available request type, right? So and has all the available means of testing your endpoint. So that is the point. So what I was trying to show us is how we can test our endpoints via scripting, like that is via a Python script like this. But usually we will do what test that with Postman. So let's go back and let's test this with Postman. So let's go back again, having the same explanation in mind, right? Having the same explanation in mind that in order to interact with our server is via request, right? Is via request. So let's go back again and let's test this man out. So we have a URL here that says that you want to add two numbers and we want to collect two numbers. So how do we collect these two numbers? I can either remember this interaction has to happen with request. So I can answer, okay, fine. When a request is coming in, I want the request to come in with two query parameters, num1 and num2. You can choose your own parameter. You can choose part, you can choose body, you can choose. There's so many parameters that we haven't actually covered, which I am thinking that maybe we can have one more session during the weekend and let's cover all the parameters. But so far, you can choose path, you can choose query, you can choose body. For me, I am confident with what we path, sorry, with query, because I just feel that query is more convenient in this case compared to path and body, right? So what do I do? I can now simply was come here, create my URL, which of course is what we do here. We do what we generate URL, right? That should accept requests. So I come to my application and then do what I generate one URL that accepts what that accepts a get request. So this is the URL here that I generated, and this is the request type, right? So now remember, because we are dealing with endpoint, it means that every interaction comes with as a request. So even if I want to collect something, collect information, or collect data, that data has to be attached to that request when coming. So what do I now do? I can now say, okay, fine. When a request is coming in, I want it to come in with two parameters, which is what a query parameter of num1 and num2, and both of them should be integer values, right? So now how do we do that? How do we establish that in fast API? We simply do what? We simply come here and provide what two function parameter, and that is automatically updated as what as two query parameters. So it means that what that even if we've said that what that this man is what is a GET request and this is the URL, it also means that the client or whoever wants to interact with this man must do what, must specify two query parameters, num1 and num2. That's basically what it means, right? So now we can do what, we can now go and test, because at this point we do what, we now collect those values. Remember, they are what, they are parameters, they are means of sending information, right? So that's how we interact. You send it via the request, all right? And then when the request comes, we can do what, we can get what we want out of that particular request and do whatever we want, we intend to do with it, right? So now let's go and let's do that. Right. So go back to Postman. Let's test that here, because we don't have the front end guys to test for us. So we have so let's test it out and then wrap it up for today's class. All right. So I think we've almost spent almost 3 hours, which science says that what, after 2 hours of tutoring, you should not go beyond 2 hours, because the brain has a limited amount of hours that you can process things. So we are violating science at this point. All right, so let's take this and let's go ahead and let's wrap it up. All right, okay. All right, so let's go back and let's test it out. So remember, I said that what, that every endpoint that we have like this, right, has an invincible domain name. So now how do we get that invincible domain name, right? That's where we come in and do what and did what we did here. That way we do what we get what the invincible domain name there, and I can take that man and go to my way, go to Postman and test it, because we don't have anybody to test this man for us. So we have to test it ourselves. So I come here, I'll paste my URL, right? Remember, every request must come with the URL alongside with the method. So let's go back and let's see what method is this endpoint collecting. even network want us to jump back. All right, so let's do this and let's quickly do this and let's end this. So we have our type there. So are you seeing my screen? Okay, sorry. Let me go ahead and let's share my screen. Hopefully, all right. So we have our type there. We have our request type there, right? Remember, if two things compulsory, the request type and then the end point. Every other thing there is optional, right? Every other thing is optional, right? So now we can do what we can make the request. So with Postman, I can do what I can use this for testing. So I can do what send in my request. So this should not throw me an error saying that I'm missing two things. And the request of the query. It means that this request, even if it's meant to come in, we somehow establish in our code that this endpoint must collect two parameter query, right? Num1 and num2. We haven't set it to be we haven't set it to be optional. So we have to go back and provide those two values, right? So we go back again and provide those two values because this is a query. It means it must come after what how do you call it? A question mark sign, right? And then I can come give it what the parameter name, which is num1, alongside with the value, which is what this can be 10, and num2, which is 30. Okay, and then I can do what I can send, and then if I send again, you see we get our response, right? So that is basically how we do what we interact. Every interaction comes as request, and what makes up a request? The type, right, which is get or post, and then the URL. And then if this interaction needs data to send in, right, this data can either use any of the available ones that we've covered so far, which is what path or which is path or query or body, right? So depending on which type, it can now choose which portion of your request should it stay. So since path and query is attached to the URL, so we don't really need to do what to actually worry much. But if we need to use the body, which we saw what we did, you have to bring in that pedantic class and do what and specify for body. That is that, right? That is basically that. So I believe I'll be able to convince us and not confuse us that that we've outgrown Python basics, and then every interaction should be done with request. Whether you want to collect a username, you use request. You want to collect age, you use request. You want to collect email, you use request. If you want to collect like 4 to 5 things at a time, well, that's where you can use body because that one looks convenient for sending 5 things at the same time. But if like one thing, like just name alone or age alone or 1 or 2 things, then you can use query or path, right? But the whole point is that every interaction is via a request, right? Every interaction is via a request. All right, question. Gabriel, your hand is up. Go ahead and ask.
I said something before you said it's not accurate. I said, Laura, I asked if gets and impute is almost the same thing. You said no. But now you are using get. What's the difference between get and post?
Get is a method of HTTP, right? Is a method, or should I say, is a type that defines what kind of request is this, right? So it's a web HTTP protocol, right? It's a protocol for every request. Every request must be defined by the type of by type, right? So generally, get request means that we want to just fetch information. While post, it means that we want to submit information. So when we are using post, we are mostly likely going to be asked for request body, right? Post means that they are sending information like as a JSON standard, right? While get means that you are collecting something, right? Not necessarily sending in a JSON structure. That's basically the difference. It's more like a standard of defining a particular type of request. So if I should come here and change this now, right, this will still work, right? If I come here and if I come here and change this from get to post, right, this will still work as expected, right? But the difference is that I have now defined that this man should only accept a post request. So that means if I go back and try to send this request again, I should have a method not allowed. So it means that this request can only come in as a post type of request, right? So I have to come back and change this from get to post and then send it again. But then post, like I said, post is mostly associated with what we're sending data. So by convention, if someone sees post, it assumes that you are sending just a structured data, right? So post is mostly associated with structured data. Of defining the request type, but not sending in information. So a means of sending in information is what is via parameters, right? Is via parameters. But this method here is what is defining the law, or should I say the rule that governs a particular request. Data is being sent via parameters. Is that understood, Gabriel?
Sorry, I don't really understand it, Shabo. Let's just end the move.
All right. So, what people want, you could just basically just come here and just it. Now you can just come here and just Google up HTTP method and their uses, right? Right, methods and uses, right? And then you basically see what people mostly use them for. But it doesn't mean that they cannot be used for any other thing, right? But then they can be used for something else. So like I said, this is basically all of them. So you could see, and each of them has their differences. Maybe you could just do this and think this will help you, right? So and all those stuff. So, as they have their intention or their what we are just standard, right? So clearly
I don't think he's coming back. Oh, let's go just end this class right now.
It's been a while now.
I think he has joined now.
Okay. Oh, he's back.
Is he back? I'm not seeing his name.
He's not yet back. He's not yet back.
And let's wait small now. If he doesn't come back, we'll just end class. Let me even check Discord if he has dropped any message. Never.
Osato, abeg, if you end this call, abeg.
Sorry, guys, we are here. We need to learn.
Look, you want to do backend. Backend don't come now.
This guy, I think they worry you. Try to say we need to learn.
No pop.
My man brain
Thought
don't
almost
fool. Every
full.
guy don't fool. You see those people who come late and then
Oh, we
first
don't
come
end
out.
the recording back. We don't end the recording back.
Recording still there. Blast.